So thank you very much for attending. My name is Bill Singleton. I am the Vice President here at Ecopia AI. I've been with the organization now for 7 years. Ecopia has been in existence for 10 years. And our sole purpose is to convert massive amounts of optical imagery from many different sources and convert those into vector-based maps so that organizations in the public sector, in insurance, can accelerate and start driving to insights in a much faster manner. There's countless examples where we see clients that receive massive amounts of aerial and satellite data, or even street view and oblique information, and it takes them a very long period of time in order to convert that. And all of a sudden, all of these data sets become out of date fairly quickly. And so really where we want to exist is in a space where we are helping our clients convert all of that information into database layers that can be used with any GIS program. So Esri, QGIS, there's a number of AutoCAD. There's a number of different ways that you can use our vector information in order to help drive solutions for your organizations. So looking forward to answering your questions as we go through some of this information today. So just a quick recap of today's agenda. I'll just quickly go through a brief introduction of Ecopia and the process. I'm not going to dive too much into the weeds, but I'm always happy to answer any questions that you might have toward the end of the presentation, or we can even take some advanced conversations offline if that's something that you're really interested in learning a little bit more about. The most important thing that I do want to get to, though, is walking through how the applications that the data that we're creating across the country is helping to support at the municipal, state, and federal level. We have several partnerships, and we've gotten very good at being able to bring many different organizations together, both from the commercial sector and civil engineering, but also having multiple different levels of government work together in order to create base map products that can serve a number of different applications. So really looking forward to getting to that piece of the conversation so that you can really get a look and feel of what kind of data is being created. So hopefully that'll spark a few questions because everyone's a little bit different in terms of the requirements that they have. We're going to jump in. Troy, one of my colleagues, is going to be presenting a number of the federal programs that we are keeping an eye on and starting to use in order to help accelerate municipalities and state capabilities in order to help create more data so that they can accelerate their mapping and planning initiatives. And then we'll end today off with a panel discussion. We have two individuals that are going to be working with us, and I'll give them a brief introduction a little bit later on today. So when we initially got our start, Ecopia AI was was focused on a few basic features, building footprints, road networks, using satellite imagery, and helping federal governments at international scales. But what we recognized is if we could start using better resolution information, so starting to work with aerial data, oblique, and street view data, there's a number of additional features that we can precisely extract to help the GIS community. And so that's really where we started to accelerate our portfolio and expand to help with a number of different kinds of asset management features to help a number of different applications, whether that's helping in areas like flood and stormwater analysis, to areas with impervious surfaces and keeping track of natural features, to other transportation assets. So identifying a number of different features in the public right-of-way, whether that's pedestrian features to intersection detail. So we're really excited to be able to continue to deliver additional products using the same technology by just expanding the types of partnerships that we have in the optical field so that we can provide much more advanced data products for our partners. So just a quick review. We have been doing this for 10 years now. We've worked with federal governments all around the world. We have built base maps in over 100 different countries for 100 countries across many different applications. And so these are just a few of some of our largest clients that we're working with. One of our biggest partnerships, which I'll discuss a little bit later in today's presentation, is actually collaborating with NOAA and their Coastal Change Management Program. This is an exciting opportunity, which I'll talk a little bit later about, because it offers state and municipal and also some in the civil engineering field the opportunity to work with all three levels of government in order to create some of the mapping data that's required for some of their long-term mapping initiatives. We've also worked with NASA to create 3D building models and worked with a number of different NGOs to create massive data sets across Africa and Asia. The reason why I bring this up is AI can be very difficult. I know that there's a lot of organizations out there that offer either in-house software solutions or try to create data sets themselves. Ecopia has collected hundreds of millions of training samples over many different kinds of features over various different kinds of data sets, and so that we have the skill sets in order to be able to create these base maps, not just at a country scale, but on a global scale. So before I jump too much in, I wanted to give you a few examples of some of the MPOs and state level governments that we're working on within the US versus some of our international experience. But before I dive too much into it, I was hoping to open up a quick poll to get a little bit better understanding of what communities our current attendees might be representing. So I'll keep this open for a quick minute here while I do a quick sort of rundown of some of the organizations that we're working with today. So just to give you sort of a brief overview in this slide, we are working with the city of Detroit and helping with their stormwater team. So this is one of our impervious surface examples. I'm going to keep a lot of today focused on our transportation applications, but just know that there's a number of different ways that we can create data and then tailor it so that it meets a number of different municipal requirements. So I'll go over some of the state examples and transportation examples a little bit later on. But we are also working with organizations like Baltimore, the Baltimore City Regional Transportation Commission. So extracting things like sidewalks and crosswalks across the entire MPO for multimodal analysis. There's an example I'll show a little bit later on with Contra Costa County's Transportation Authority. So really helping identify advanced transportation features over 20,000 square miles of one of the largest counties in the US. And we also done Vision Zero projects for organizations like the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So that was actually in support of a Vision Zero initiative. So also extracting sidewalks and crosswalks, but that's a great example of how the same data set can help to support a number of applications. And so that was actually, in that particular example, the MPO was mixing incident data on top of sidewalks and crosswalks so that they have an additional data set to understand where there might be some low-hanging fruit to help try to reduce pedestrian casualties. And one of the largest organizations, our longest relationships is actually working with the Southeastern Michigan Council of Governments. So, and I'll show you a quick data set from there. Essentially what we've done is we've done some pedestrian right of way, but we've expanded that to a full land classification data set in order to help with their stormwater teams as well. So really trying to build out the different kinds of portfolio information that we're creating in order to help a number of different applications and groups within each MPO. So I'll close down the poll at the moment and just quickly take a look at some of the results. Okay, so we've got a fairly sort of even grouping here amongst different kinds of MPOs, civil engineering users, and the optical imagery space and the state level government. I'm looking forward. We have examples for each, so looking forward to jumping into those in a few slides here. Let me just quickly move this. So one of the advantages of Ecopia's technology is that we are imagery agnostic. And so what that allows us to do is to work with several different inputs, whatever makes most sense for our customers. I do know that state governments and MPOs have made previous investments in their own imagery sources. We are happy to use any kind of imagery that you might have already created or purchased in order to create our base maps. But we also have partnerships with the satellite community and on all of the major aerial providers in order to be able to use that data set as well if your information might be out of date. So really the power of our technology is being able to use that at any different kind of resolution. Typically, we use 1 meter and better. Satellite imagery is great to do things like change detection, especially in disaster scenarios. So it's a lot faster in order to get it's a lot faster in order to do change detection. But we also use aerial imagery wherever possible because it provides us the highest quality resolution and accuracy to identify some of the more precise features, which you'll see in a few slides here. We're actually also adding new capabilities using Street View data. So that's actually helping us to start to identify things like street furniture within downtown cores. And so that's something that we will be developing through the end of this year. And one of the other things that we like to do is continually to add to that base map that we're creating. So adding things like addressing and other and parcel data and other alternate data so that we're continuing to add a more robust data layer that can be used by all of the applications that you're using today. When we initially got our start, and this is going back 10 years ago, we thought of almost being a software package that was provided to organizations. But what we understood fairly quickly is that there's a lot, the AI is pretty tricky. There's a lot of parameters you have to set. And when you start to get to results that are sort of 70, 80% accurate, you're still doing a lot of manual labor on the back end in order to improve those results. And so what we decided to do was to take all of those capabilities in-house and to create a semi-automated approach to extract high quality vector-based map data. And so I say semi-automated because we're always constantly improving our process. We have built robust algorithms on our end, a robust machine learning system that's based in AWS, so that it's very easily expandable based on our customer requirements. But we're always triple checking all of the results so that we have that same level of so that we have the highest level of human accuracy. We like to say human level equivalent. Above 95% accuracy on a global scale. We've actually been reviewed by the federal government in Canada and federal entities in the US. We're typically at around, when we extract base map data, we're typically at around 97, 98% accuracy here in North America. We just have we have more experience working in those areas. It can be a little bit more tricky when you're trying to extract very precise features in an area like Cairo. In Egypt, very dense and low color contrast. So typically we say 95% accuracy, but it's a little bit higher here in North America. And so what does that allow us to do? That allows us to create high accuracy data across the country and allows us to keep that up to date on an annual basis. So now we can take imagery as it comes off the line with our aerial partners and update our base map data so that you're constantly getting a base map that is the most recent and up to date. And it's very easy for us to do change detection in that regard. So I'd like to open up one more poll before I dive too much into really what I wanted to get to here is to start talking about some of the application data from some of the public sector peers that we're working with today. But we wanted to just get an understanding for what are some of the main applications that you have the most experience with. We're always interested to understand, and I'll go through a quick example of what Illinois Department of Transportation and Chicago and CMAP, Chicago's MPO group, is using our data for, but it's always great to have a better understanding of new applications that this data can be used for. And so we always want to have an idea of what's most important to our customers. But just a quick sort of review of some of the data samples, which I'm about to show you. Really what this base map data is allowing some of our MPO customers to do is to improve walkability, helping with active transportation planning, having a better understanding of the public right of way. which is also helping with applications like Vision Zero, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on in our presentation, but also with things like ADA compliance, so American with Disabilities Act. So there is a pretty rigorous process there, but we can provide a lot of the data that's required just even by using aerial aerial sources to have an understanding of where are all of your sidewalks and crosswalks. What is the width of those sidewalks and crosswalks? What is the passable width of those sidewalks and crosswalks? And what this allows us to do is this data is not just for capital cities anymore. And this is where we've seen a lot of success with the groups like the Department of Transportation. We want to be able to provide the same standardized data set to all of the communities around the state. And so that really helps with long-term planning. And then it also helps some of the tertiary cities and villages who might not have the same GIS capabilities in-house in order to build this data set themselves, so that they can they can help with their active transportation plans, which you'll hear a little bit later on in the presentation, can help with actually getting your hands on additional funding. So I'll close down the poll at the moment. Just wanted to get, so active transportation planning. Yes, so we are seeing a huge focus on that, really trying to make cities more walkable and livable for a number of different modes of transportation. So I'll go through some of these data sets right now with that in mind. So the first example that I'd like to walk through today is one of the first projects that we did. And so this is actually in the pedestrian transportation space. This is actually going back 5 or 6 years ago. This is the first project that we did with SEMCOG. In this particular example, they wanted to have an understanding of where all their sidewalks and crosswalks and parking facilities were, so that they could have do some routing applications from different neighborhoods. And so what you can see here is what we extracted center lines and width of all of the different sidewalks within the entire sort of 46 I believe it was 4,600 square mile region that surrounds Detroit. And so what you'll see here is even when even when we are working with situations with leaf-on imagery, our technology has the capability to infer where features are continuing. So it allows for a very complete data set, just as though a human were making this extraction themselves. And so what we did here was, and you'll see some additional examples of this when I show some of the applications that the CMAP in Chicago put together for us. But some of the interesting inferences that they were able to determine was that 76% of their population was within 100 feet of the nearest sidewalk. But that also does mean that there is a portion of the population, and typically in less fortunate areas, that might not have the ability to have access to pedestrian right-of-way facilities. And so these are typically the people that rely on mass transit the most. And so it actually can create equity and safety issues when you have individuals having to walk on the public roadway in order to get to mass transit. This was an example that is that was for San Bernardino. So San Bernardino is a massive county out in California, one of the largest counties in the US. And so what we were asked to do for the Transportation Authority for the county was to build out an advanced transportation data set. So this is a few years from our first foray with SEMCOG. And so what we were doing here was extracting center lines and width measurements of everything for a multimodal, for long-term planning, multimodal transportation analysis. And so in this example here, and this is just a portion of the data set that I've pulled up, we're extracting things like sidewalks, as I mentioned in our previous one, but now we're going into many other pieces of the public right-of-way. So items like shoulders, different kinds of right turn lanes, different kinds of laneways, all of the planting strips that might be required by public works in order to maintain, different kinds of medians, which we're starting to see a much more requests for. So painted medians and raised medians, which might be responsible for some of the public works teams, things like marked bike lanes. Everybody is a little bit different when it comes to one of the things that we've learned is, and this is why we always appreciate the opportunity to talk to our customers, is everybody's always a little bit different in terms of how they want things represented. And there's a lot of flexibility with how we will create these vector features based on the applications that you're using. So if you want to have things that continue, so in this particular example, we had bike lanes end at every intersection, but that's something that can be continued based on the visual pieces that we see in here. So I'll turn everything on and off. I just want to be mindful of time, but I do want to show quickly the last two examples, but it just gives sort of a much more thorough view. All of the green dots here are actually street trees, which was another thing that was requested from the team. This is just a quick example of the 3D that we're building. This is for visualization purposes, but really what I wanted to have the opportunity to show was some of the work that we're doing across the state of Illinois for IDOT and Chicago's mapping authority. And so this is just a quick review. This is just a small tile of the data set that we're going to be building for all of the 16 major MPOs across the state. And this is actually an interesting initiative because we are bringing multiple levels of government together, which I'll talk about just in 2 seconds here. But essentially what we're doing here is extracting a number of different land classification features, which I'll sort of, I'll turn on and off right here. So these are the buildings. This is our full land classification. And then you can see here, I can turn on things like sidewalks, and all of these features have width measurements by segment, so they have a better understanding and definitions for each. So this data set is actually helped. This is just a quick storyboard of some of the different kinds of applications that are being built by the state and by Chicago by using this information. And so just understanding where there are gaps in the sidewalk public right of way, and so that they actually bring up photos here that I can just have to zoom in, sorry. So you can actually, they've actually paired this with Street View data so that you can see where there is some issues, and then different kinds of corridor analysis. So I'd be happy to send you this link. This is something that they've posted to give an example of what they're doing across the state. And then the last example I'll show so that we can get into the federal funding opportunities. This is something that I'm also very excited about. This is where we're actually extracting all of the different individual painted lines using aerial imagery. So I can turn these features on and off. That's the center lines here. But you can start to get an understanding of where crosswalks are, where different kinds of turning lanes exist, even things like parking. And this is something that we can do for cities across the, this is where we're being asked to do this particular example versus the previous example I showed, which is more sort of our general land class and transportation features. This is being asked for in cities to help aid with public works departments. So this is something that we're also really excited about. I'll show one last area before I start to hand it off. But even when you have areas with shadowing, the system is able to combat that, to extract different kinds of data. So I'll just quickly switch back here. One of the biggest announcements that we have is we've just recently received a commitment from NOAA to help with their coastal change management program. So we're going to be mapping, doing base map data for all of the coastal counties across the entire United States. And we're going to be keeping that up to date on a rolling basis. And then one of the biggest, and what we've also been able to do is work collaboratively with the Illinois Department of Transportation. And that's actually going to be working with NOAA as well. So it's all three levels of government coming together to build data sets that can be used by all three layers of government for different applications. So we're really excited about this initiative. We really want to we've already elected to build all of this information ourselves. And so we want everyone to be able to take advantage of that. And so we want to try to find a way to to help bring everyone together to collaborate. So we're really excited about that. So I'll take this time now. I do want to save some time for the federal funding walkthrough. I'm going to introduce Troy. Troy is a former MPO planner with broad experience in grant writing, program design, and delivery, as well as ADA accessibility and bicycle and pedestrian planning. He's very passionate about elevating the quality of GIS data for the non-motorized transportation environment to develop performance measures and accelerate improvements equitably. So I'll please join us, Troy, and love for you to take it away.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks everyone for joining in. I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of the opportunities, some that are new from IIJA, some that are kind of reconfigurations of existing formula programs that you might be familiar with. So starting first of all, our top pick for, kind of having a little bit of a crossover with what we do is Safe Streets and Roads for All. A lot of you may be familiar with it already. It's a discretionary program, direct from the US DOT. And one thing that's kind of interesting about it is, versus some of the other direct DOT programs in the past, there's significant opportunity versus, say, the build grants or infra for basically smaller municipalities, rural districts, tribal governments to participate based on the anticipated funding levels and the splits per project. So essentially, a broad rule of thumb is for participation, all MPOs can apply, as well as any subdivision of a state. So that is transit districts, any special districts that provide transportation services, tribal governments, and any grouping of those. So if there's a set of rural municipalities that constitute an area that is kind of uniform or has some sort of a unofficial planning entity, that's something that they can participate in as well. It's already opened its first call. Projects are being evaluated. It closed September 15th. So it's expected that this is going to be the same timeline every year. It's funded at $1 billion per year, 80% max for federal. You can suggest less depending on the funding ask that you are requesting. But of course, as we all do, we'll get more information on that from the existing call and see how many applicants applied. So just to give you an idea of what applying for these funds would look like, there are two components that you might enter into, depending on whether you have an existing safety action plan that meets the requirements set forth by the US DOT. So you end up basically reporting that in your application. So if you don't have an existing safety action plan, this funding will be available for that. I think it's a 60-40 split on implementation versus planning at this point. So you can use it for applicable plan development activities. So if you needed to make any sort of data purchases or, if you had any sort of subscriptions for location-based data that would be applicable to your safety analysis, that can be used as part of this grant program. And in addition, if you have a safety action plan, you can kind of go one of two routes. You can either choose to apply for supplemental planning activities. So if you wanted to make any improvements or tweak your safety action plan, just having an existing plan in place that you want to register with the US DOT is not precluding you from adding anything onto it. And then, of course, the plan implementation grants, which are kind of your more construction, implementation, traffic operations sort of activities. And so for implementation, in order to get to that point where you have 5 million to 50 million max award on the urban side and 3 to 30 on the rural tribal side, you have to have your action plan in place. That being said, a plan implementation grant can also include an application for supplemental planning. So just because you're applying 1 year for an implementation grant doesn't necessarily preclude you from, again, making improvements to your plans along the way. And the next one I want to get into is increasing safe and accessible transportation options. Now, this one is a bit interesting. It's not necessarily a direct discretionary program. It's formula, and it goes down to states and MPOs. That doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't become a competitive grant program if the state or the MPO wanted to allocate it that way. The funding level varies depending on where you're at. So generally for states, it's a 2.5% set aside of state planning and research funds or respectively for MPOs, 2.5% of the Metropolitan Planning Program funds, and can be distributed at 80 to 100% federal, depending on what the individual entity decides to do. That being said, the application, or I should rather say allocation timeline of those funds kind of varies by where you're at. So the best people to talk to would be your local MPO reps, policy committee reps, as well as the state districts. But ultimately, the reason why this kind of set aside was created by the USDOT was to accelerate initiatives for safe alternatives to transportation. So there are kind of three main objectives that they associate with it that you can use the funds for. One would be complete streets, either the adoption of policies or standards or project prioritization plans. That is in a case where you don't have existing complete streets policies. If you do, you're not necessarily required to utilize these funds for that purpose, but that's something that you can use it for if the policies or standards are maybe, say, not adopted at the MPO level. Perhaps they're adopted only at local level. You can also use it for the development of transportation plans as well, just like SS4A. So the focus is a little bit broader here. You can use it for active transportation, non-motorized connectivity with transit, public transit ridership increase plans, bike ped safety as well. And then there's sort of a third use for it, also still planning, but I set it aside for a reason, regional and mega regional transit. So intercity kind of efforts, probably more on the state side, and then support for transit-oriented development as well. And so next one I want to talk about is the carbon reduction program. This one's also formula. However, it's different from the last. It's not a set aside. It's actually new funds that are available through IIJA. And it's distributed both by states and MPOs. Funding level, again, kind of varies, but this one is available for the current fiscal year on the USDOT website. So you'll see the breakout by each state. The way the funds are distributed is 65% is divided proportionally among all of the urban classifications of a state. So 0 to 5,000 population, 5,000 to 49,999, 50,000 and above for MPOs, and then 200,000 and above for the large MPOs, transportation management areas they're classified as. The rest of it is able to be programmed by the state, that last 35%. And it can be used for a couple of different things, both on the planning side, construction and operations as well. So one thing that is set as a requirement, I believe it's by November 15th of 2023, it was 2 years following the passage of IIJA, MPOs and states are required to have carbon reduction strategies in place. At this point, they're able to allocate these funds without having those in place, but these funds can be used for the development of those plans. So single occupancy alternatives can be a planning effort that is supported by that as a part of a carbon reduction strategy. Quantification of emissions in particular is a pretty important component. It can be used on the infrastructure side for active transportation facilities, public transportation, alternative fuel infrastructure, whether it be sort of a burning fuel versus non, as well as non-capacity CMAQ projects. So projects that would be CMAQ eligible, but that do not add any existing capacity. They can improve throughput, but not add existing lane capacity. On the operations side, it can fund things like intelligent transportation systems, traffic operations centers, freight planning for equity, demand management, street lighting retrofits, so replacing the existing, say, halogen bulbs with LEDs, as well as diesel retrofits, which people who are familiar with the CMAQ program would be pretty familiar with as an action. So those are kind of the existing ones on the horizon. It depends for the carbon reduction program. Some MPOs may choose to make this a competitive process. At this point, I've seen a lot of MPOs allocate the funds to existing projects that qualify that are in the pipeline. Of course, that is subject to change because these are funds that are going to be continually released every year. So lastly, I just want to get into a couple of the newer IIJA programs that are subject to appropriations. So they've been authorized as a part of the passage of IIJA, but they're something to look out for in the future. One is the Healthy Streets program, which is one that I'm pretty excited about. It's actually one that is targeting reduction of impervious surface area and tree canopy expansion. So it will actually pay you to do both. It will pay you to install permeable pavements. It will pay you to expand tree canopy, expand green infrastructure. And it's at $100 million a year anticipated, 80% federal. That'll be direct application to US DOT, just like SS4A. And another one direct to the US DOT that's anticipated is $200 million a year, also 80% federal max. It's the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. Now, this one is targeting sort of your active transportation networks based off of a spine. So kind of your more regional trails in nature. This one is actually two-pronged. You have basically your $3 million a year in planning grants. So that's the portion that if you're making any sort of investments in the data that you have available for evaluation or an active transportation plan, those would be applicable. And the rest are allocated toward direct construction of infrastructure. So definitely be on the lookout for those in fiscal year 23. To my knowledge, these will not be released in 2022, but definitely still be on the lookout. And yeah, these are kind of the things that we're keeping our finger on the pulse for. Some of our customers have actually used these grants in particular. State planning and research, I mentioned, the one that had the set aside associated with it, was a part of the CMAP data purchase, IDOT data purchase. So we've got some experience working through these and have done quite a bit of research on how we can leverage them to help basically get access to updated and recurringly updated data.
Thank you very much, Troy. Yeah, I think I definitely want to reiterate that piece. Troy really knows this stuff, and what our main objective is to not only be able to provide data to help you with the long-term planning, but to help you try to access this, so that we can bring together different funding sources to make everyone's lives a little bit easier to help with your long-term planning initiatives. So I want to thank you very much for our portion of the presentation. Again, please follow up with us. I'm sure there'll be some questions toward the end of today, and we can go over some of either the technology or some of the funding and grant opportunities that are there. But in the meantime, now I would like to quickly introduce the first member of our panel, David Wasserman. Do you want to quickly join me with on the video? Welcome. I want to thank you again for joining us. David Wasserman is a data science practice leader with Alto Planning and Design. He works at the intersection of urban informatics, 3D visualization, geospatial analytics, and visual storytelling. He brings years of experience and passion to applying scientific computing, spatial analysis, and scenario-focused storytelling toward the development of effective transportation planning solutions, tailored to enable access and resilient communities. His current focus areas are enabling data-informed scenario planning, identifying how to align community goals to metrics to track progress towards them, incorporating civic data science into projects with web delivery and computer vision-derived data sets, and generating accessibility metrics that can identify the possible benefits of projects and who they go to. So looking forward to just a quick introduction, David, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to share my screen. So I think these grant opportunities that were discussed just earlier illustrate that we're seeing this convergence in what the technologies are enabling us to do at a time where the focus of transportation is shifting. And so what does it mean to have that scalable context for multimodal transportation planning? And by the focus of by the focus shifting, I'm referring to that we're seeing that these investments in transportation are increasingly expected to address a diversity of community goals, improving mobility, economic development, equity and environmental justice, supporting recreation and healthy habits, and mitigating climate change. These are very large expansion of scope in terms of what we're trying to do with these investments. And as Ecopia was talking about how they're helping with looking at impervious surface cover, tree canopy, and some of those other NOAA-related coastal change programs, these are the types of examples of where we're seeing not only intersections with the transportation data that they can extract, but with climate change and topics like thermal comfort in communities. And as these technologies help us emerge, help us digitize assets and infrastructure, ranging from tree canopy to sidewalks, there's a diversity of possible benefits, a scalable view of context and constraints to change within our communities. Those parking inventories we saw can help, for example, inform curbside management strategies and which ones might work where. They provide repeatable methods to data collection, and these data sets are incredibly helpful for informing scenario planning and getting a better multimodal understanding of how different transportation facilities might react to bicycle and pedestrian demand, for example. So integrating them more into activity-based models with very detailed asset data. And these data sets can do everything to inform applications for raise grants, but also inform analysis or be part of supplemental planning activities as part of Safe Streets for All, as was alluded to earlier. So what are some applications of this? I think one is safety and vision zero. As safety professionals continue to consider how we build out safe systems, these types of contextual databases are key to informing proactive approaches that anticipate human error and inform safer street and intersection design. One project where we looked at this was Modesto, California, where we looked at how AI-derived sidewalk and crosswalk data could help us understand existing infrastructure's relationship to safety conditions in your schools. And as part of a deeper analysis of collisions examining the location of where pedestrians were struck, we found that those that were crossing the street outside of a crosswalk, 2/3 of those fatal and severe pedestrian collisions occurred on road segments with greater than 800 feet between crossing opportunities that we were able to identify with Ecopia data. Additionally, by incorporating sidewalk, roadbed, and other detailed lane information into our streets, into our street center lines, we're able to enhance the accuracy of our transportation network inventories to create more rich metrics as it relates to bicycle level traffic stress or pedestrian level of comfort using a diversity of scoring methods. A lot of these metrics require detailed information about the width of the sidewalk buffers, and a lot of other detailed information about tree canopy and also thermal comfort, which some of our trail planning tools, for example, at Alta, use a lot of that detailed information for. And once we have these multimodal metrics, we're able to incorporate them more readily into network analysis and connectivity testing. And finally, comprehensive right-of-way data can help us scale up the existing allocations of our right-of-way so that we can transform these static databases into potentially more dynamic design models where analytical metrics and visualization are more tightly coupled. There are a variety of tools that benefit from this type of data, whether it's ArcGIS City Engine, like you're seeing here, or other tools like Remix Streets. All of them get a very good kickstart by being able to have access to this type of multimodal data. And finally, in conclusion, there are lots of enhancements and examples of best practices arising from industry that can help inform your application of these technologies and things to consider. APA has a planning advisory service memo on artificial intelligence and planning practice if there's interest. And also just in terms of a wider array of technology resources that can help inform what are your options for pursuing different enhancements to active transportation or safety. The APA Technology Division has an urban and regional planning resources repository that contains everything from public data to different vendors that might be able to help you. And with that, that's my presentation.
Thanks a lot, David.
Pass it to Leah, right? Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll quickly introduce Leah if you want to quickly jump on.
Hi, everybody.
Leah, very nice to have you on. Thank you again for your participation today. Leah is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, a national campaign supporting cities working toward Vision Zero, which means zero traffic fatalities and severe injuries. The network helps communities develop and share best practices for safe mobility for all road users. As a German Marshall Fund Fellow, Leah researched Vision Zero strategies in Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. Prior to that, she was executive director of the 10,000-member San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, which promotes bicycling for everyday transportation. Leah formerly served with the board of directors of the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway and Transportation District, and the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. So we're really lucky to have you, and thank you very much. Take it away.
Thanks, Bill. I'm just going to do a really quick hello and really excited to get into questions and discussions with this group. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's been sharing. Couldn't agree more with what Dave just shared there about this real change in emphasis or evolution, maybe an emphasis. We're starting to see it. I love the list he shared around, kind of moving from this focus on how many cars can we move and speed and kind of, level of service, kind of the traditional transportation safety measures to more, I would say, holistic and kind of societal needs of safety, public health, environment, economic equity priorities, et cetera. It's really exciting. We're certainly not there yet. I guess I would just say from our perspective, we're in this transition, but we have so much room to improve and increase and really be shifting away from kind of that more, I would say, monolithic approach to, how do we move as many cars as possible to, what are the broader benefits to transportation investments and policies. So I jumped right into the topic that I'm most excited about to discuss, but I'd love to hear others' thoughts. Just quickly, if people want to learn more about the Vision Zero Network, please check us out online, visionzeronetwork.org. But what we do is help communities across the nation. We're US focused, really helping particularly local communities, more and more regional and other levels too, make a commitment to Vision Zero, the goal of zero traffic deaths, and also really make sure that they can institutionalize and really implement that for change. So really thinking about how do we move past kind of the slogan of, hey, safety, great, we all agree, we all love safety, yes, of course we're committed, to really making what is a paradigm shift and really a real investment, not just of funds and data, but also policy decisions and trade-offs at times to prioritize safety. So looking forward to our discussion and we'll leave it at that for now.
So I'll ask everyone to jump back on, and we'll get started with our panel discussion. We'll absolutely leave time for the crowd to ask any additional questions. I'm sure that more will percolate to the surface as we get started with the discussion. But I guess that's where I wanted to maybe get started based on the title of today's presentation. I wanted to maybe get your experience. I know Troy on our team has done a lot of work, and I've had some customers that have been leveraging some of these programs. But I wanted to maybe ask both David and Leah yourself, what has been your experience with some of the federal programs? And I wanted to ask this actually to poll the whole audience as we get some of these answers. But yeah, I wanted to maybe open it up to David first. First couple of questions, we'll just get both of your guys' opinions on some of these programs. And then if there's any other programs that you might have experience with, because I definitely want to be able to tap the wealth of knowledge that your teams have.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of interest and right across RAISE grants, but also Safe Streets for All programs that are looking to really understand where are safety issues in their communities, where are better places that they can look to expand access to active transportation options. And data like this really helps us build the case for change in these communities. A lot of communities don't know where their sidewalks are in any comprehensive way. A lot of it seems like a very basic thing that we should be able to have. But a lot of data is collected, but then siloed in different formats, data systems, and trying to bring it all into one integrated place makes it very difficult to look at these types of issues, even at a corridor or a citywide level. as part of grant applications. And so, you know, what we try to do when we work with clients to develop these grants is kind of help them build a narrative of where based off of their existing plans, or based on plans we want to help them build or develop, where can we make the best cases for federal funding, and where can we identify key gaps that type of funding can help address. I don't know if that answers that question, but yes, there's been a lot of interest in pursuing some of these grant programs.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've been paying the most attention, frankly, to that Safe Streets for All grants program, partly because that is a new one. It's big, right? As you guys talked about earlier, about $1 billion a year. I mean, we want it to be even bigger. That's big, but we want it to be bigger. But that it's really notable that money, those funds will go directly to local agencies, regional agencies, and tribal agencies. That's not the norm, as folks probably know. Usually the funding goes to states and then they divvy out, or states to MPOs and divvy out. So this is a really big deal in the sense of particularly having more local control and flexibility. So I think it's thrilling that we're seeing so much interest. I think it's a great, I don't want to say experiment, because hopefully it is a real commitment, but I think we are going to see different, my guesses or my prediction is that we are going to see some communities, you know, push the needle and do some work that they wouldn't normally be doing because of some funding types of restrictions or you know, oh, this is the way we always do things with this funding pot. Particularly with Safe Streets for All, you know, there is a real emphasis on innovation, on pilot projects, on certainly a focus on communities that have been traditionally underserved. So focusing on inequities, focusing on walking and biking, focusing again on quicker turnaround of safety, you know, get it on the ground, see how it does, make transitions or make changes, not necessarily like, oh, let's plan for 10 years and get one thing done, but rather let's think about what we can do in a more broad systemic approach with more quick fixes. So I'm really excited about that one in particular. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, the two of you. So I guess sort of dovetailing on that, sort of, if let's say you were to get started and you were a new community or a state sort of looking at this issue, sort of what do you need to get started in terms of tackling the issue of long-term planning? Like what are some of the ways that you've experienced working with either municipalities or state level governments, particularly if this is sort of a new focus for your organization, especially with all of the new funding that's coming in? David, do you want to go jump in?
Yeah, I can go first. I think a lot of people should start with the basics and pay attention to kind of what's the status of their existing plans, how are they fitting into these frameworks that we're seeing come out, but also what's the status of their existing data. And I'm not just talking about asset and inventory data. I mean everything from their understanding of their own collision data and its quality. Are there biases in it? Is there underrepresentation of some groups versus others? Why might that be the case? And kind of taking a good look at where those things are, because a lot of people assume they're further than they actually are. And so that's kind of that's a thing that we've seen again and again, is this surprise of kind of the state of their understanding of their own communities and where that can be better. But also the other thing is just trying to get a sense of where those gaps are is an early thing that and I mean gaps in either the plans and kind of outlining for yourselves to be eligible for these programs. Where do you need to focus after taking a good look at the combination of those two things? I'm sure there's others that have better thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, I agree with your point, David, of the back to basics, or, start with the basics. I think I'll say the thing I'm concerned about, and I don't think this is coming from bad intentions as much as, if anything, good intentions of like, let's get things done. We want to do good things, right? Which we all do. I do have concerns about people adopting or thinking they're adopting Vision Zero when they're really just adopting kind of the name or the label. And again, I don't mean this isn't meant to be critical, but again, not out of bad intent, but say, oh yeah, we're Vision Zero. We have a safety provision in our plan. We're trying to do good safety things, of course, right? We all are, we should. To really be adopting a safe system approach, which is the core of Vision Zero, it really is a bigger shift. It's going to start with some small steps, right? It's definitely going to start with a deeper data analysis and a deeper or a stronger commitment to follow that data. But if that's all it were, frankly, it'd be a lot easier that we'd all be doing it perfectly. And we're not, of course. So I think it's really important to think about the depth of the change that's needed and to be really honest about it's going to be hard. Politically, we can't dance around this. The stuff we're talking about, let me name some of the hard things: lowering speed limits, reducing travel lanes in order to build out more sidewalk space, more bike lane space, more transit space. It is not likely, and I'm talking more about cities right now, right? Like there's a difference on major highways between communities. Let's set that aside for a second. But thinking about where we really have a mix of users, people walking, biking, driving, taking transit, which is, most more built out areas. If our goal is, and it is, right, to say, hey, we want safer, more healthy, more green, more affordable, all these good thing transportation options, there are going to be trade-offs. So I think the sooner we get that out on the table and don't dance around it, because in the end, no matter how smart your planners or engineers or tech folks are, they're going to bump into, and you probably already are, you're going to be bumping into the political reality of, oh, we all agree with those goals of health and safety and environment. Oh, but don't change my street. Don't slow my street down by 2 seconds. Don't cause more congestion, right? Those things are going to happen. I mean, there are going to be trade-offs, and we're in this I think we're in this time where we can't pretend we can have it all. And to say, okay, to get more of this, we're going to get a little bit less of this. But this wasn't, and by this, this convenience factor. Well, the convenience factor wasn't going that great anyways, right? Let's be honest. There is congestion. And sometimes congestion's a friend to safety, slows things down, et cetera. So how do we talk and work in an environment that is, I think, more honest about that and calling the tough questions?
I totally agree on that. I think there's this real question of values that a lot of different communities across levels need to address when they're thinking about what their strategy is for how they fit in with these programs and kind of these ongoing shifts that we've been talking about. I think the only thing I'd add on is kind of outlining some degree of like where different agencies in your space align with what you're trying to do. And identifying where you can affect change in the areas that are more in your control. Like a lot of the key trend we see in a lot of our Vision Zero planning efforts is trying to identify what's going on state facilities versus city facilities versus local roads, and trying to get an understanding of how do you talk about those trade-offs in an informed way across multiple levels of government, so that so that you can start to generate hopefully some consensus over these trade-offs and start moving the needle on what it would take to get different scales of government to align. So that I totally agree.
That's great. Thanks, David. I actually sort of dovetailing onto that question, because you were mentioning some of these alternate data sets, Leah. I was wondering, is there other sort of socioeconomic information that can be sort of brought together with the data sets that are sort of being presented here today, but other information that can help either make the case or to help improve communities that can be pulled from other sources?
Thanks, Bill, for mentioning that. I really appreciate it. I think another area we're evolving in the right direction, like really great progress, but more needed, is this idea, and David, you touched on too, kind of how there's more intersectionality of issues, right, and agencies. So we're getting better and better thanks to, data like you guys are able to pull and track and analyze. We can do a good job, hopefully better and better. Where's our high injury network, right? Where are these severe crashes happening? When are they happening? To whom, where, why, right? We can get a lot of that data together. That is super important. That's our base for traffic safety planning, roadway safety planning. But I'd say where we need to be going and are going more with Vision Zero is to say, okay, now let's layer on top of that other really important health and socioeconomic data. If you look at areas, I'll give some examples. And here's a place I'll just say, your public health department can be really critical in teaming with this. So they can scan and they've got the data to be able to say, okay, here's our areas where we have a high number of seniors. Here's our areas where we have a high number of children. Here's areas with a high number of, or let's say low car ownership, high transit ridership. Here's areas where we know maybe it's high asthma rates or some other health factor that may be related to high amount of car exhaust and freeway touchdowns, et cetera. So you have you have those obvious injury obviously injury related issues that are very traffic safety related. But then you have these other issues that, of course, or factors that are very important, right? We know, say, seniors and kids might be more physically vulnerable in terms of being severely injured. They may not be driving, for instance, and maybe more dependent on what, maybe want to be walking and taking transit more. So, trying to think about how are we, and then I haven't even mentioned, of course, racial equities, income equities and racial equity or racial demographics. Those are so important. So I think we have to be starting on that data, that level of data with these cross layerings. And then to say, okay, I'll just give a quick example. In my city of San Francisco, you could look at a map and say, okay, we could spread, let's say we have, I'm just going to make this up, $100,000 in safety money. We could spread this $100,000 over the 10 supervisors, city council districts evenly, right? So everybody gets 1/10 of that $100,000. That's the way we've traditionally done funding, right? From an equality perspective geographically. But when you dig in a little bit, of course, not every one of those districts in my city, or I'm guessing your city, is the same. For instance, there's 2 districts that are particularly high traffic injury and death rates. Those also, surprise, surprise, not really, are areas that are low income, communities of color, tons of, or higher level of freeway touchdowns and arterials running through. So more traffic, higher level traffic, less built out walking and good walking and biking environment. So surprise, you have higher injuries there. So back to the money piece, that, the data could, or the old way of thinking would be spread the money around. But I'm really proud of our city. What it said through its Vision Zero data analysis and really factoring in those other socioeconomic and health factors is, no, these 2 districts deserve more than 1/10 of the money. They're getting a bigger share of the funds because they have more of the problems there, right? So I really appreciate that the data can help do this, and more of that values-driven approach can change policy and funding decisions.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Absolutely, Troy, go for it.
But I appreciate you saying that, because I kind of remember coming from an MPO, we had that kind of typical scenario where you have, as far as, bicycle and pedestrian data or safety planning, you've got your main city, a couple of superstar suburban municipalities, and then essentially a massive wave of gaps in between. The MPO will try to maintain sort of a unified data set on the availability of those facilities. But ultimately, it comes in like a 3-year update cycle. The same person might not be responsible for it from period to period. And I think it's kind of important from an MPO perspective, for the MPO to be able to actually extend its capacity, as opposed to just trying to build it piece by piece, bit by bit with local technical assistance or what have you, but to actually be able to extend their planning capacity into those areas, because they are the primary distributors of the funds that through which these projects are going to occur in communities that have equity concerns. They're the ones that are least likely to have the data in the first place. So not to mention, it can provide sort of an evidence-based regional approach that doesn't leave anyone out, so that it holds accountability.
Yeah, I just want to add on that we're seeing more MPOs take on the role of like data provider or acquisition coordinator, basically, in a lot of different regions where they help provide a lot of their partner agencies a lot of these types of data sets in a way that benefits everybody and benefits these plans and helps create a fine-tuned understanding of what's going on. And we talked about this intersectionality of other data sets. There's a lot of new, like, important equity data sets that are out there that are at the federal level, done by nonprofits, you name it, that can help you tell the story of not only the distribution of burdens from transportation beyond just looking at collision data, but also where those others, where those other components are. Like, something we're starting to explore is, can we use activity-based models to look at where simulated low-income volumes are relative to collision patterns? Is that something that can help us move beyond just talking about equity on just like where people live, but where they conduct their lives, and frame it that way, for example? So like these are the types of good examples of potential data sets where you can help tell a story of impacts in ways that we just couldn't do before.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on that, David, I mean, that's sort of where our experience with the Illinois Department of Transportation really unfolded. We were doing a lot of work with Chicago in order to, because they have a very sophisticated MPO group, and they are sort of acting as those data aggregators and data providers to a number of their groups. But essentially, what ended up occurring is they wanted everybody in the state to have the same sort of to have the same standardized data sets. So it's always great when we can help those sort of data coordinators collect everything for their individual communities. I wanted to just quickly, keeping in mind in time, if there are any questions, we'll sort of wrap up with one or two more questions for the panel here. But if there are any questions that you already have on your mind before we get started with the open Q&A session, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section. I'd love to start organizing those as we sort of get through these last questions. I really, the last question that I had, David, I was sort of more directed to you with some of these, like what kind of asset data is typically used to enhance travel demand models, and sort of what are sort of the contextual ties that better enable sort of land use planning with transportation planning, before we sort of get into there. But we open it up for everyone.
Yeah, I think, and to be clear, I don't build travel demand models, but I do apply them. But I've seen, in terms of what goes into developing them, a lot of the time these data sets have access to detailed parcel level data in terms of where activities are distributed, but the network data for them tends to be very simple. But if you're able to integrate a better understanding of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, these are the types of things that can be used to inform kind of the routing and the kind of the agent-based like decisions for mode choice that you may not have had access to in a model that was just working off of a high-level understanding of where automotive network infrastructure is, what the capacity is, the types of turn lanes and intersection configurations. These are the things that are typically coded in. But a detailed understanding of multimodal infrastructure and the emergence of more detailed models like activity-based models enable us to kind of potentially take a deeper dive than we would have otherwise, and kind of turn them in towards these new questions that we're trying to address in transportation planning. And in terms of transportation land use coordination, I think something that I think about a lot is how this type of data, especially the land cover and building and 3D extraction data, can help communicate change or potential scenarios in ways that didn't exist before. For example, can you develop 3D visualizations and software platforms like City Engine to look at how the existing land use and infrastructure coordinate today and what they might look like in the future. Those are the types of things where I think if you're proposing those scenarios, this type of data definitely informs the constraints and the existing condition in a way that you may not be able to do otherwise.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, guys. That was great. I know that everybody here is really excited about this about this field, and so I really appreciate them taking the time to join us today for some of these panel discussions, so that we can help sort of accelerate the movement of trying to create these sort of safer, more equitable cities. So I'll open it up to questions right now. We've got a few online here in the Q&A section, which I'll get started with. But once we're through, I'll post everybody's contact information. And yes, also, if there are any sort of additional questions with the federal funding as we sort of come to the end here, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer any questions when it comes to being able to maximize the dollars and the funding that your organizations have access to, so that we can help with some of these initiatives. So Colin writes, if LiDAR is more accurate than the satellite imagery method approach with AI, is LiDAR originated data offered as a service data analysis option from Ecopia? So I'll take this one. So LiDAR is always very exciting to use. We incorporate it with our analysis wherever it's available. I know that we have connections with the 3DEP program that has been trying to capture LiDAR across the US for many years now. Now, the issue with LiDAR is it's very expensive, and it tends to not be as readily available. I mean, we have used LiDAR in our analysis to help augment the features and the base maps that we create wherever possible. We've done similar kinds of analysis in areas like San Francisco with our 3D building models. Wherever it's available, we love to incorporate it, and it's actually going to be used in some of our street view models for our advanced transportation extraction as that is released going through early 2023. But the issue is, in a lot of cases, it can be a very old vintage. I mean, I've received some open LiDAR data from the 3DEP program that's up to sort of 8 years old. And so you're trying to do a balancing act of the precision, which is great, and we would love to incorporate it wherever possible. So the answer is yes, as an option, but you just want to be able to balance that with the vintage. And that's why a lot of our processing is focused on working in the optical imagery space, just because it's so much more abundant in using aerial and satellite imagery. But thank you for the question, yeah, because that's something that we always want to be able to use the best data sets possible, whether it's something you've already invested in, or we also have additional partners that we can also leverage to help include that in our analysis. So let me just, I don't know, just while we wrap up here, I know we have only got a few more minutes. I didn't know if David or Leah, you had any other questions for each other. But if there's no other Q&A from the crowd, then we're happy to sort of provide our contact information, and we can help with any other questions that you might have in the future.
Yeah. I guess I do have a question for Leah, kind of based off of the early discussion on trade-offs. I guess, are there examples of communities that you've seen take a data-driven approach to addressing those trade-offs head on that you think are worth kind of talking about? And I don't know if there's any examples that you might think about right off the bat, but or I guess even maybe framing it as, are there any strategies that you've seen be helpful in addressing those trade-offs and what you've seen work?
Yeah, great question. I don't know if this gets at it, but I think, for instance, in that San Francisco example I shared, kind of making that argument politically, this idea of, yeah, we could sprinkle the money around equally, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, or we could acknowledge that these two districts bear more of the brunt of the system we've built and are less safe. Let's put more money there. I think that kind of trade-off discussion is happening more because it's both because of and in spite of the data. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's interesting because you could say, okay, the data is really needed to show that. And you also need to bring in kind of this values proposition to put the data in context, right? And I think maybe in terms of the particularly racial and income equity challenges, that's where I'm seeing the most potential and movement, is to say, okay, there may be a high number of crashes in this district and some injuries. There's a lower number in this district, but maybe it's a higher death rate, or maybe it's an area that we know has been underserved in any ways, or as somebody pointed out earlier, the numbers may not show it in terms of injuries, but it's partly because no one's walking or biking there because it's so bad to begin with. So this idea of like, okay, the data shows one thing, but if you dig a little deeper and talk to people and learn about it and go on the ground, you realize, oh, the data's telling it, the data's not telling the full story, basically, partly because it's so bad that no one's moving around there. That's a problem, right? So that it's not really getting at your question, but maybe it's a sense of like, is it as simple as just, follow this, follow that? Of course not, right? There's more levels to it. So I think that's a place where we have to say, okay, all of this important data and the advances you all are making in kind of the data collection and analysis, how do we pair that with the lived experience? We're big fans of great community engagement, absolutely. But I want to be honest that sometimes you can say community engagement until the cows come home and you never move a project because you can't get community agreement. Like, let's be honest, there's that risk, right? Yes, you want real, authentic community engagement, but you also don't want to talk about it forever and there's no changes. And there's a safety problem, right? So now I'm going into a different area. But, I think, a secret sauce question is, how do we find that secret sauce or recipe between, good data and recognizing you also need to fill the data holes with lived experience. And in the end, you need to make decisions, right? And you're not going to make everyone happy. So all those things kind of mixing in is, I think, what we're grappling with most. But I think the more that we can bring voices forward again to speak to the data, to say, okay, here are people who actually live in the neighborhood, or here are people who walk in the neighborhood, here are people who've lost loved ones or been involved in crashes, to really be a side, stand next to that data to help give it real life is important.
Yeah, because I think the data is only as important as like the stories and the kind of the connection that people have to it. Like something we've noticed is beyond just looking at disparities in safety is people, there are disparities in who has access to sidewalks, who has the crossing distances in different communities. There are a lot of low-income communities in industrial areas, where industrial areas are often these areas where infrastructure, pedestrian active infrastructure just drops off. And it leaves gaps and disconnects communities in a lot of different contexts. And being able, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So one thing this is on my mind. I'd love to get you guys' thoughts. This is really a question to me of, you made me think of something, David, it's kind of a different direction, but this idea of a lot of communities are questioning the way we're using enforcement, traditionally have used enforcement, I should say. So I'll just give an example. In my state, California, a law passed recently that would kind of de-emphasize ticketing of quote unquote jaywalking. And that is coming, and more places are thinking about that. That's partly coming because people look and go, wait, people are quote unquote jaywalking. I really hate that term, but people are jaywalking often because there's not a good crosswalk. There's not a good crossing. The land use is such, the design is such. I'm not saying that's always the case, but it's often the case. So now we're ticketing an individual because of some systemic gap, right, that we could fix. Now go even further and you dig into the data and you see, oh, wow, there's huge racial inequities and income inequities in who's getting ticketed for jaywalking. And you could, of course, talk about other things too, but I'll mention jaywalking because it's on my mind. I mean, I wonder, I think we could should we be doing more data analysis over, hey, where are the police giving these tickets? Well, places are doing that. For instance, I just read a study in LA, I forget the exact number, but massively people of color and people in low-income communities are ticketed for jaywalking at like 3 times, some huge number, the rate of people, white people and people in higher income areas. So that probably has something to do with the environment, is my guess. But could we go in there and do some analysis to say, okay, at these high rates of jaywalking ticketing, are there also, what's the crosswalk regulation?
Spacing, yeah.
Could we be linking this?
Those are the types of things that I think scalable access to this type of data is really helpful with. Like there are a ton of questions that when you don't have access to even where the crosswalks are, which we don't, a lot of the time, like getting that in any scalable form is actually a barrier. I think those are important questions. Like, are there relationships between how we're approaching enforcement, whether it's effective, and who bears the burdens, and what are the perceptions of how that's being done, as either helping or hurting, those are important questions that I think if we were able to look at these things in a scalable way, you're able to develop more firm relationships than you would be by just looking at anecdotal data or just looking at one set of one data point, which is either collision data or something else. Because I think you're spot on that this context that we bring to collision data, whether it's infrastructure context, land use context, socio-demographic, that really helps tell those stories of like, well, the collision data is like what's happening, but it doesn't really tell you about the mechanics of why or how.
What's actually going on behind the scenes.
Right.
And that's exactly with our MTC example that we were having. It's great. And I think the perfect word is contextual analysis, right? You want to, there's a number of different departments that have different data sets, whether it's incident data, collision data. Then you also have the ticketing data that you also just mentioned. But if you just have a roadway center line or a roadway polygon, you're not really capturing what is going on. And then on top of that, there's a number of different things that you can potentially have some low-hanging fruit, right? What they were looking for was, can we compare that with either the ticketing data or the incident data, and then take things like the speed limits that you were looking at, but then look at, do we really need to be ripping up pavement in this certain intersection in order to improve this area? Or maybe is it just having a non-intersection crosswalk at a specific guideline? It's just really creating some painted lines in order to try to improve the safety of this area, because just too many people are trying to make a crossing where this might not be a safe area. So I think really what we want to be doing is just layering on more and more information so that you can make those prescriptive decisions.
If I could step in, just kind of one thing that's really simple, but something that maybe a lot of folks won't necessarily think about, that I kind of ran into when I was trying to perform safety analysis off some of our bike ped data. Not ours in my current position, but my old position. And having the data all in the same vintage so that you can actually run an analysis over a certain period is very important. You can have a data set that is based on the latest imagery, where you have someone just sort of coding in a feature as they pick it up or in a set specified period, and you can confirm that it existed after a certain time period. But when you want to run analyses, it's not necessarily as convenient to run them on that data set because you can't verify what necessarily was there. For example, if you were going to go into an analysis over a certain time period of traffic fines, you might want to know, for example, what do the road networks look like in those neighborhoods? In a lower income community, oftentimes you're going to have more freight routes. They'll have wider lanes. It's more, inducing for people to speed. So those kind of things come into effect. But if you have a data set that's sort of updated haphazardly throughout the year, it kind of throws your validation off. Even if you're doing something like developing crash modification factors retroactively, those are that can become, it's a simple thing to think about, but it can be a huge issue for running analyses like that on that scale.
And speaking of vintage, like there are opportunities that can come up for us, when you're able to get this data at a larger scale about what's effective, like we're talking about differences in crossing opportunities between communities, if you're able to fill in those gaps, scan 1 year and then scan another, you know, collision data might take 5 years to accumulate to where you see change, but other data sets might see some change more immediately. Example could be looking at mobile trace or connected vehicle data to look at whether speeds change on these corridors after significant right-of-way changes. You could see from connected vehicle data, it has the incidence of harsh braking events changed and its relationship to the changes in infrastructure that you've seen over a year. You know, these are the types of things that I think if you're intentional about how you want to use this data, it provides a way to really not only find out where there are issues, but monitor progress in a way that is integrated and leverages the best data that we have available for a lot of different things. So that I completely agree with that, Troy.
Perfect. Well, there's one last question just as we wrap up, and I'll thank everybody. But Amadou asked if Ecopia solutions and services are available in regions outside the US and Canada, and the answer would be yes. We actually create massive amounts of content across Europe, Africa, and Asia. We just did full country analysis over Italy, and that's just about to expand to the UK and some areas of Brazil and Malaysia. So we're always happy to expand our capabilities and use different kinds of optical data sets, whether that might be satellite based on the availability of aerial data, but always happy to have that conversation. Here's our contact information. Always happy to answer any other questions that you and your teams may have, especially when it comes to the federal funding. And then we'll also, I'll also collect and I'll add to this slide both David's and Leah's contact information in case you have any other questions for their respective organizations, because I want to thank you very much, not only for the attendees, but also to my great panelists here. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about the transportation space. And so we're looking forward to answering any additional questions and speaking to any of you in the future. So thank you so much again. And thank you to the Connect Me team for all of your organizations.